Sosuke Aizen is one of the most influential antagonists within all of anime and manga. Within chapter 178, we learn about his desire to sit on top of the heavens as the ruler of reality. Aizen aims to achieve this goal by overthrowing the Soul King. In order to gain the power to do so, he creates the Hokyoku, a device that grants the heart's desire of its user. For the sake of his plan, Aizen went through some extreme lengths. He had faked his own death, he had murdered the entirety of the Central 46, and he had secretly orchestrated the execution of Rukia. He was able to achieve all of these impressive feats with the help of his Zanpakuto Kyoka Suigetsu. Aizen's resolve was unshakable. He was prepared to go to any lengths in order to fulfill his ambition. But what if Aizen hadn't been defeated by Ichigo? This fascinating possibility is what I intend to explore within this video. My plan is to break down Aizen's objectives and how they evolve as we learn more about him throughout the story. This will help us to speculate on the fate of the Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and the world of the living if Aizen wasn't defeated by Ichigo and he ended up infiltrating the Soul King's palace. Make sure that you stick around until the end of this video because I'm going to be delving into a massive potential clash which would occur between Aizen and the Zero Division. I'll discuss the potential outcomes of this inevitable confrontation with the most powerful Shinigami battling it out against the Hokyoku empowered Aizen. Then following this, I'll delve into how the 1000-year Blood War arc would have panned out with Aizen in control of reality. This does involve theorizing an epic final showdown between Aizen and Yhwach as we decide who is the ultimate Bleach antagonist once and for all. So prepare yourself for a very detailed exploration of this very chaotic what-if scenario. Let's delve into a reality where Sosuke Aizen was never defeated and he achieves his ambition of sitting on top of the heavens, taking the vacant throne of God for himself. Within chapter 421 of Bleach, the final battle between Ichigo and Aizen comes to an end. Ichigo is able to deal a severe blow to Aizen, who, empowered by the Hokyoku, has transformed into this hideous butterfly-like form. But he is no match for Ichigo's final Getsuga Tensho. During this battle, both Aizen and Ichigo have become transcendent beings, so they have surpassed the limits of an ordinary soul, including that of a Shinigami or a Hollow. Now, even after this devastating attack, as long as Aizen's heart's desire remains firm, then the Hokyoku will continue to assist him by healing his injuries and evolving him even further. Within the manga, Aizen's defeat was caused by a combination of factors. The first was that his resolve had wavered, and the Hokyoku had started to manifest Aizen's loneliness within his heart, which is what Ichigo had felt when they were clashing swords at the end of their battle. And the second factor which led to Aizen's defeat was Urahara's Kido, which was able to bind Aizen. So unfortunately, Aizen's subconscious true desire to have an equal and to free himself of his loneliness causes him to lose his evolved transcendent form as he reverts back to a Shinigami as the Hokyoku rejects Aizen as its master. So this is how things panned out within the manga. In this video, I'm going to be talking about a hypothetical scenario where Aizen emerges as the victor of this final battle. Kubo enjoys employing the tactic of leaving things open to interpretation. Therefore, we can interpret that Aizen's loss is something that could have been prevented. After the final Getsuga Tensho was used, it didn't completely destroy Aizen. The Hokyoku had almost adapted to match the power of Ichigo's final attack, as the possibility was there for the Hokyoku to transform Aizen into a higher level of transcendence, surpassing that of Dangai Ichigo. Following this attack, Ichigo's Reiatsu was depleted. If Urahara did not intervene and help Ichigo to seal Aizen here, then Ichigo's defeat was inevitable, as Aizen would have outlasted him thanks to his immortality. We know that neither Ichigo or Urahara could destroy the Hokyoku due to the fact that it contains a fragment of the Soul King within it. So for the purposes of this what-if scenario, let's assume that Aizen ended up defeating Ichigo on the basis of two conditions. Urahara did not fire the Kido seal into Aizen, and secondly, Aizen's willpower was strong enough to retain the Hokyoku on his side. So his subconscious desire for acceptance and to be free from his loneliness does not manifest, so he doesn't revert back into a normal Shinigami. Aizen knew about the true nature of the Soul King, and it's for this reason that he wanted to take him down. During the 1000-year Blood War arc, we learned that the structural integrity of the three realms of Hueco Mundo, the Soul Society, and the world of the living are all held together by the existence of a Soul King. In chapter 616, Mimihagi, the right arm of the Soul King, was able to prevent the collapse of reality by holding together the severed pieces of the Soul King. So for Aizen to sit on top of heaven, he needs to find a way to get over this issue of eliminating the Soul King, but somehow still preventing the collapse of reality. Maybe Aizen could become an evolved version of the Soul King who retains his consciousness and can carry out the functions of the Soul King while still being himself, which I honestly think would be possible because the Hokyoku has merged with Aizen, thus granting any of his desires no matter how impossible they may seem. First thing that Aizen would do upon defeating Ichigo is to create an Oken. During the Arrancar arc, we learned that the Oken is a key that grants entry into the royal palace. Later in the 1000-year Blood War arc in chapter 519, we learned that the Oken is made up of the bones and hairs of each of the members of the Zero Division. However, in chapter 223, Yamamoto reveals that it can be created via a spiritual technique which involves the sacrifice of 100,000 inhabitants of a concentrated spirit zone. This is a point within the human world which possesses the largest concentration of spiritual beings. This just so happens to be Karakura Town, which is why the Department of Research and Development was asked to create a duplicate of Karakura Town on the outskirts of the Rukongai district. Aizen's plan from the very beginning was to sacrifice the souls of all of the inhabitants of Karakura Town in order to create his Oken. After Ichigo is defeated, I presume that Aizen could create the Oken without anyone standing in his way. So the first major event would be that all of the inhabitants of Karakura Town would be killed. This includes Ichigo's sisters, as well as his friends from school. It would be a tragic end to a lot of the characters that we were introduced to during the Substitute Shinigami arc. After creating the Oken, Aizen would now have access to the Royal Palace. We were introduced to this realm in chapter 516. The Royal Palace consists of the Greater Palace and the 5 surrounding detached halls which belong to each of the members of the Zero Division. The reason why an Oken is needed in order to gain access to the Royal Palace is because of the 72 protective spiritual barriers which exist between the Royal Palace and the Soul Society. It's important to highlight that Aizen probably spent decades preparing for the moment when he would be able to reach the Royal Palace. During the events of the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, he is seen listening closely when Shunsui reveals that Hikifune had been promoted into the Zero Division. So Aizen is aware of who and what the Zero Division members are. So he is aware that the combined might of all of the Zero Division is greater than that of the entirety of the Gotei 13. During the Fake Karakura Town arc, Aizen was easily able to deal with the best captains of the Gotei 13. Admittedly, he did have some help from some of the Arancars, especially Wonderwise, who was able to subdue the flames of Yamamoto, but this was Aizen just in his base form. The stage at which Aizen is entering the Royal Palace, he is a transcendent being. He most certainly will have had a plan to deal with the Zero Division, which unfortunately wasn't revealed to us within the manga. Upon arriving within the Royal Palace, it's safe to assume that Aizen would be greeted in a similar manner to how Yhwach was in chapter 597. I'm assuming Senjumaru would appear in front of Aizen with the Divine Soldiers. She refers to them as the Blade of the Soul King. Now, I think that Aizen will be surrounded by these Divine Soldiers, but he will be able to effortlessly subdue them by emitting an intense amount of Reiatsu. You have to remember, in chapter 415, we get this manga panel which shows Gin trying to reach for the Hokyoku and then being quickly thrust away by Aizen. When we see Gin again in the following manga panels, he has a huge empty gash where his arm was touched by Aizen. At this stage of his evolution, Aizen was in his butterfly stage. Considering the lethal damage that he did to Gin's body, it's obvious that if Aizen headed to the Royal Palace in his monster form, Aizen would more than likely be able to do devastating damage to the bodies of the Divine Soldiers. Following this, we need to look at the recent changes that have been made to the Zero Division within the 1000-year Blood War arc anime. This will help us to figure out how Aizen would fare against any of the Bankais of the Zero Division. Senjumaru's Bankai was exclusively revealed within episode 26 of the new Bleach anime. It is known as Shatatsu Karagara Shigarami no Suji. The abilities exhibited within the Bankai forms of the Zero Division are fascinating, and they are mostly based upon abstract concepts. Senjumaru has the power to literally weave the fates of her victims, while Ichibe has the power to give and change the name of his targets if they have been struck by the black ink of his Shikai. Each of these Zero Division members possess vast amounts of spiritual energy. This is demonstrated firsthand within the anime. It's revealed that they can destabilize the balance of all of reality across the three realms if even one member were to release their Bankai. So it's for this reason that these Zero Division members are forced to seal away the true power of their Bankai with their own lives. We see just how incredibly powerful a Zero Division member's Bankai is when Senjumaru's Bankai release causes noticeable tremors across the Soul Society and the human world. Now, even taking all of this into account, when you consider the fact that Senjumaru was eventually defeated by the Schutzstaffel, I believe that it's safe to assume that Aizen would somehow be able to defeat her and the other members of the Zero Division too. The consensus amongst a majority of Bleach fans seems to be that Aizen would face the most difficulty in defeating Ichibe. During Ichibe's battle against Yhwach in chapter 608, he reveals that anything that Ichimonji's ink covers loses its name. In addition, when Yhwach uses his Sanct Altar ability, it fails to work against Ichibe. This is because he has power absorption immunity. The power summoned by Ichimonji is stolen by Yhwach, but it cannot be used by him or used against Ichibe. We also know that Ichibe controls all of the color black in the universe. So despite Yhwach stealing Ichibe's power from him, because he has control over the color, Ichibe is able to regain his powers easily. As I mentioned earlier, Ichibe's Bankai Shin-uchi has the power to carve a new name onto anything that has been covered by the black ink of his Shikai. In chapter 609, Ichibe makes Yhwach as powerless as a black ant. Now, given that Yhwach uses the Almighty to defeat Ichibe in the end, we can tell that he is not entirely unbeatable, but he is still a formidable opponent to face overall. Even though he is immensely powerful, Ichibe is unable to rename things which contain some of the Soul King's power. Within the third volume of the Can't Fear Unworld light novels, we get some backstory about a Zanpakuto named Iko Mikidomoe. This Zanpakuto was created by Uetsu Nimaya by sealing a powerful hollow into the form of a Zanpakuto. In the past, Iko Mikidomoe had tried to attack the Soul Society and had even defeated a young Yamamoto. However, the hollow was eventually subjugated when Ichibe erased his name using the ability of Ichimonji. We know that eventually Iko Mikidomoe negated Ichibe's Bankai. In chapter 24 of the third volume of Can't Fear Unworld, there is a passage which highlights this. It states, even a small fragment of the Soul King seemed to have given Iko Mikidomoe immense power, to the point that Ichibe's Zanpakuto ability had been weakened and the hollow Iko Mikidomoe had regained his true name, which Ichibe had overwritten using his Zanpakuto Ichimonji. Considering what we learn in this passage from Can't Fear Unworld, I'm willing to believe that the Hokyoku is outside of Ichibe's powers. Aizen probably loses several times until the Hokyoku really powers him up, and then Aizen eventually wins by evolving and defeating Ichibe. Consider the fact that Aizen had evolved into a being that was powerful enough to replace the Soul King, and that the Zero Division, whilst powerful, are still ultimately Shinigami. I don't think that they would stand much of a chance against an ever-evolving Hokyoku-empowered Aizen. I mean, even Ichibe's ability to wipe and rename things can ultimately be overcome by simply having superior spiritual pressure, as shown when Iko Mikidomoe managed to break through his Bankai seal upon eating a couple of Soul King fragments. In addition to this, whenever we imagine a battle between Aizen and the Zero Division, we have to ask ourselves, can Ichibe's Ichimonji overcome the power of the Hokyoku? As I will explain, there is definitely an argument that suggests that the Hokyoku would overwhelm Ichibe's powers. In the manga, the only individual who we are aware of who was able to nullify Ichibe's ability was Yhwach. However, he only managed to do so with the help of the Almighty, which of course is a power that he inherits from his father, the Soul King. As we all know, the Soul King is the closest thing to God in the Bleach universe, so understandably the powers of Ichimonji are no match for the Soul King. Like I mentioned earlier, Iko Mikidomoe was able to severely weaken these abilities too, proving that there is a way to overcome the Zanpakuto abilities of Ichibe via raw power alone. Now, we know that the Hokyoku had allowed Aizen to become a transcendent being, granting him insane levels of spiritual pressure. If you remember, battles between Shinigami ultimately at their core are battles between spiritual pressures. Hacks and broken abilities can only do so much when an opponent is far superior to you in terms of sheer power. If Aizen hadn't evolved to a state that was higher than Ichigo, then he almost certainly would do during his battle against him. At this point, where Aizen has evolved to a higher state of being, Ichimonji would no longer be able to do anything to him. I believe that Aizen would have already reached the peak of his evolution and would have been stronger than Ichigo by the time that he arrives within the royal palace and it's time for him to battle the Zero Division members. So as controversial as this may seem, I believe that Hokyoku empowered Aizen wouldn't have too much of an issue with defeating the Zero Division members. Saying this, they did not intervene during the Arrancar arc, leading me to believe that they probably weren't that concerned with what Aizen was up to, and they don't think of him as much of a threat. Now, we can't really put too much faith into the confidence of the Zero Division, because during the 1000-Year Blood War arc, they were confident that they could defeat Yhwach, but they still ended up losing. This is because Yhwach had some of the most broken abilities within all of Bleach. But when you consider the fact that Aizen has been empowered by the Hokyoku, and he has Kyoka Suigetsu on his side, it's safe to assume that he poses just as much of a threat as Yhwach. Thanks to the Hokyoku, Aizen can regenerate or even evolve himself until he is stronger than whoever he is facing. So considering that Aizen is successful in defeating the Zero Division, he would still have to face off against the imminent threat of the Quincy's. The Quincy Emperor's song reveals the inevitable return of Yhwach and his Quincy Empire. This version of Yhwach which would emerge to challenge Aizen would be one that hasn't absorbed the Soul King, and additionally Aizen would be empowered by the Hokyoku here. 2 points which make their battle here very different to how it had unfolded at the end of the Bleach manga. Would Yhwach have any chance against Aizen under these circumstances? Both Yhwach and Aizen's ideologies are very different. While Aizen desires to be the false god of the current reality, Yhwach desires to merge all of reality into one singular realm, eliminating the concept of death entirely. Yhwach desires to make the world immortal, while comparatively Aizen is the only immortal being in his ideal world. In short, Aizen viewed the Soul King as an unnatural, lifeless puppet, and he refused to bow down to him. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to suggest that Aizen had wanted to create a brand new world in his image. In a battle between Yhwach and Aizen, I believe that even if Aizen is empowered by the Hokyoku, he would still have a lot of difficulty in defeating Yhwach once his ability the Almighty is activated. This is because the Almighty is simply one of the most overpowered broken abilities that Kubo was conceived within the story. I'm inclined to believe that this battle would go in Aizen's favor, or at the very worst it would be a stalemate. This is because Yhwach's powers have not been boosted by absorbing the Soul King here, since Aizen is pretty much the Soul King in this version of the story. From the end of the Bleach manga, we are aware that Kyoka Suigetsu is also able to counter the Almighty. In a battle between base form Yhwach, who has the Almighty, and Hokyoku empowered Aizen, we have to look at both the Almighty and the Hokyoku. Like we have already established, the Hokyoku contains a fragment of the Soul King, which is the source of its wish-granting power. The Soul King, of course, was the original wielder of the Almighty, which is an ability not to just foresee the future, but to alter the future. So the outcome of having a wish granted and altering the future in your favor is pretty much the same. Another similarity lies in the limitations of the Hokyoku and the Almighty. The Hokyoku cannot just fulfill any wish. According to Aizen, it can only give you powers which you could potentially obtain by yourself. Similarly, according to Yhwach, the Almighty can only jump from one grain of sand to another. It cannot make impossible things happen. The Almighty has the power to only manipulate possible futures. Yhwach, by using the Almighty, would be able to resurrect himself, and there's always the chance that Yhwach could also absorb Hokyoku empowered Aizen if he is unable to beat him. One of the key factors which makes me believe that Aizen would have a massive advantage in his battle against Yhwach is that he demonstrated at the start of the 1000-Year Blood War arc that he could make Yhwach susceptible to Kyoka Suigetsu without showing him the Shikai release of his Zanpakuto. Aizen's use of Kyoka Suigetsu against Yhwach had affected his perception of time. Another interesting possibility that I've been thinking about is this idea of the Hokyoku abandoning Aizen during his battle against Yhwach, as it then decides that Yhwach is more of a worthy master, thus allowing itself to be absorbed by Yhwach instead. This can only happen if Aizen wavers in some way, shape or form during his battle against the Quincy leader. At this point in the story where he has defeated Ichigo and the Zero Division, and he is practically the ruler of reality, I don't see much reason for Aizen to falter or have any weaknesses in his resolve. Although it is a very fascinating thing to think about, if instead of Yhwach absorbing the Soul King to get stronger, he instead absorbs the Hokyoku and in turn has the powers of the Almighty and the Hokyoku on his side, which frankly I don't think that Aizen can compete against. Aizen's motives are centered around bringing down the Soul King and the current status quo. His plans have affected the lives of countless individuals. If Aizen was successful in defeating Ichigo, then the entire remainder of the Bleach story would have unfolded in a very different manner. In summary, I do think that Aizen, empowered by the Hokyoku, would stand a very fair chance against the members of the Zero Division. After all, in this form, he is one of the strongest characters in the series. His immense spiritual pressure warrants him a position as one of Yhwach's special war powers. Like I spoke about earlier in the video, the only real threats that are posed to Aizen if he had beaten Ichigo appeared to be Ichibei and Yhwach. Ichibei's Zanpakuto would be able to erase the name of Kyoka Suigetsu, but would this be enough, especially if Aizen is already evolved to a crazy level and has immense levels of Reiatsu? Frankly, we don't know how many more times the Hokyoku could have evolved Aizen even further. And don't even get me started on the fact that we never got to see Aizen's Bankai, which could be one of the biggest trump cards that he is hiding. But in summary, what do you think would happen if Aizen was able to defeat Ichigo? I've tried to utilize information from the Bleach character data books, the different light novels and the manga in order to come up with a detailed theory as to how the story would unfold. Do you think that Aizen would be able to defeat Ichibei? How do you think he would fare against Yhwach? I figured that this video would be very fun to make, especially for fans who didn't like the idea of Aizen feeling loneliness, which had then caused the Hokyoku to break down and reject him. So hopefully this video was a nice way to explore what would happen if the Hokyoku never rejected Aizen, and if Urahara didn't end up sealing Aizen after the final Getsuga Tensho. So yeah, I look forward to reading all of your thoughts about this video, so definitely continue the discussion in the comments. And lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this one, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.